Today, I'm in conversation with Todd Jannausch. Todd is originally from Ann Arbor, Michigan, but has lived in the Pacific Northwest for 25 years. He is an outsider artist who gained most of his working skills through his time as a shipwright and a tradesperson. He currently works as a full-time 3D production artist for Grand Image in Seattle, Washington. Todd maintains a studio in Tacoma, Washington, where he lives with his 8-year-old son, Gray. Welcome, Todd. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us today about your creativity and your art practice. For those in my community that maybe not familiar with your work, if you could tell a little bit about what you do as an artist, and then maybe start talking a little bit about your process.
Well, it's a kind of a constant evolution question, I think. I've done a lot of different things over the years, and it kind of keeps evolving. And at this point, I would say I do mostly sculpture. And up till recently, that sculptural work was based on a lot of narrative, a lot of found object and altered found object work. So trying to find things that I think that objects that people can relate to, and then altering the state of those objects in a way that kind of creates a bridge and asks questions at the same time. Prior to that, I was doing a lot of installation work. I was doing these kind of large-scale multi-artist installations that were based more on sort of how we see art and how we interact with it and view it. And then now more recently, I've taken the last year off. I had a show last March at Traver Gallery in Seattle, and it was sort of a lead in, right? It launched the same time as the pandemic. And it was a show that actually aligned really well, I think, with the current times unintentionally. It was very much about shifting spaces and how we see the spaces that we keep near and dear to us, and how those spaces shift over time. And so I had done that work until last March and finished that series. And then largely in the last year, I've taken a big step back to kind of allow myself to try and process this time, and to try and find a new process for myself in this time. I think I think a lot of artists have responded really well to the pandemic and to COVID. And everyone handles it differently. And for a lot of people, they've been able to kind of sink into that time and to really make in this time, and to find it to be beneficial in their practice in some way. For me, it's been a bit of a struggle trying to figure out. I feel like it's shifted how we all communicate. It's shifted this pandemic has shifted how we interact with each other, and sort of how we meet each other. And so for me, so much of my work had been based in things that we share, very common items that we share. And right now, no one's sharing very much. Everyone's sort of having a very independent experience. And that left me sort of floundering, to be honest with you. Like, I really didn't know. I felt very lost in the last year in my work and in my practice. I think trying to figure out where to find those places again where people connect. And I'm not sure that I have. It kind of as a result of that, I've put most of my effort in the last year into just trying to figure out what it is about art that's important to me, what my practice is going forward, regardless of the outside world, regardless of what's happening in the pandemic or in common times. Really just trying to figure out how I sustain myself without an external world, or without those external interactions. So that's really been the big challenge for me lately.
That's an interesting perspective. It kind of sounds almost like a creative block, but it sounds like maybe it's a little bit different. Do you experience creative block in the past, and do you see
Yeah,
a relationship to that?
Certainly, like I have in the past during really traumatic times. Everything can just sort of seize up. It feels like, and in the past, it used to be something that I'm not. I don't like to think of it like a block so much. I guess I think in the past it used to feel like a big fear, and that idea of a block only adds to that fear because it feels like it's something that you have to overcome. And I don't really believe that that's true. I believe that accepting that time is part of the creative process. Like accepting the time that you can't do something doesn't mean you should try and, to me, doesn't feel like something I should try and force myself through. It's more about trying to settle into that period and understand why I'm feeling that way. Trusting my relationship with art will always be there, but also knowing that that art comes from a place. That art comes from a very personal, very internal place, and the only way to, I think it's just like maintaining any piece of machinery or any, you have to maintain it and take care of it. And so I think when those blocks come now, I try and not freak out. I try not to, think that it's never going to come back. That there's no answers and it's all gone. I try and just be thankful for it, and I put everything down and I don't push into it. I try and look around and see what I've been missing, and then that is the stuff that to me ultimately fills the tank and gets me back to work.
You said something about trusting in the art. Could you expand on that a little bit and maybe explain what that means?
Yeah, I think that for me, art has kind of always been a language. It's been a way that we communicate the things that words can't communicate. And I think there's a lot of that area. I mean, I think there's a lot of, I think we tend to walk around and sort of assume that everyone's feeling something similar to what we're feeling, or they're experiencing something similar to what we're experiencing. And I think that's, I don't think that's true often. I think that there's a lot that we sort of put into categories that makes ourselves feel better. And art is sort of the channel where that doesn't happen for me. It feels like that's the truest things that I'm saying that are personal, that I don't have words for necessarily. And so it's always felt like I think just a place to try and expand from, and to try and dive into, a place to try internally. That the process has been a way to better understand the world that I'm living in. And so that relationship for me has always been very personal. Personally, it has also always been a bridge for me. I'm a big introvert, and personally, that ability to have art in my life has been a way that I can kind of bridge that and reach outside of myself, even in ways that I can't put into words. So that now I trust that language. I trust what part it has in my life, and the meaning of it for me.
Tell us a little bit about where your ideas for your artwork come from. I have a sense that as you talk about it as being a language and communicating, that your source material for ideas or concepts might be a little different.
I really like the forces at play in the world. And so that's largely what I'm looking for. I love to be able to describe tension. I love to be able to describe fear or uncertainty, or the idea of strength and weakness. These things that we have kind of concrete imagery of in our head, or concrete meanings for in our head, and we apply them to certain things, but not to all things. And so when I walk around the world, I'm often looking for those things, those places where in some natural environment, I get inspired by just an incredible, something that just creates tension, that you can so clearly see the tension. And it's undeniable that you can see tension and you can feel it. That's a hard thing to describe. Like to use the word tension means like we're using that word and we're both coming to our meaning of it. But when I can visually see it, and I've always been a more visual person, when I can visually see something that registers like a tuning fork to what that word means to me, that's really exciting. It helps me clarify the word in a way that the word itself doesn't. And so I look for those things. I look for ways to imply those attributes.
When did you first kind of discover or start using that skill of, can you pinpoint a time in your life, were you a young child when you started to notice these things, or kind of dabble in creativity, or was it something you developed as an adult?
I struggled in school for a long time, and even in art, I struggled in school. I think I had as a young person, I really had a difficult time understanding how I learned. And at the time, the schools weren't really set up to help me with that. I've always been a three-dimensional learner. I've always been taking things apart and tinkering with them and liking the way objects feel and the way objects play into my life. And I would say, early on, I was just always drawn to the object. I started out my career as a shipwright. I was a boat builder for a lot of years. And one of the things I struggled with in that field, while I loved it, doing traditional boat building, you learn these amazing skill sets, but they're very specific. You use them in very, very specific ways. And after a while, that just seemed like a loss to me. Like to use all, to be able to create all these shapes, to be able to use all these items, but then to have the task be so specific to this, it does this one thing, keeps this boat afloat, or helps this thing happen. There was some moment in there, in my vocational years, when the frustration I had, or what I perceived as a frustration I felt, was split somewhere between the love I have for making and at the same time how frustrating it felt to not be able to express everything that I wanted to express inside. And it was just a very natural, interestingly, I started out as a photographer. And I think the reason I started out in photography was I could relate to the tool of the camera. It was this physical object that was like any other tool I've used. You could just simply learn this tool really well, and it gave me a window. But then throughout time, every like the camera had a limitation to even in that, to how far I could express myself with that one tool. And it became more and more of a need to become more three-dimensional with my work. And initially in my work, I would say it has always been very narrative. I started out doing documentary photography, and then slowly that evolved into a sort of documentary fine art photography, and slowly that evolved into installation, and slowly that evolved into sculpture. Through all that's been narrative, and now I feel even the narrative is dropping away. And that's the place that I'm pressing into the most, I think, is to keep pushing further and further towards the place of the unknown things, of a truer and truer sense of my own language, and that process. And there's a letting go there that is scary. And I think that these blocks or these times when I'm unable to work or make, it usually has to do with that transition. It usually has to do with the transition from learning something new. I think that anytime we learn something new, it's terrifying. If we forget how scary it is to learn, just to learn, it's terrifying. And to keep leaning into that instead of, I think when when I run into those places where I'm not sure what I'm going to do next, I think it largely comes from of having to sit long enough and just deal with the fact that I'm terrified of the fact that I have to move into some new place, and I can't push myself there until I get there. But when I'm there, like that's the thing that will come. So to kind of go all the way back, you know, I actually am to the point where I kind of am happy when these times come up, when these kind of blank spaces come up, because I think that it's a sign that, or even when I get, you know, even when I get really nervous or afraid about my own work, I'm generally happy about that. I think that it's a sign that that there's discomfort, and that discomfort means that I'm experiencing something new. So,
It gives you a kind of a point of discovery.
yeah, exactly.
Uneasiness kind of indicates that you're about to discover something new and possibly exciting.
Yeah, exactly.
I think when we first met, you were in the middle of your photography medium,
Mm-hmm.
and I've kind of watched you over the years uh, delve into different mediums, and it's been a really great um, 10 years of observing how your work has evolved. Do you ever see a point where maybe the photography and the installation and the sculptures kind of all mesh and mold together?
Yeah, I mean, I think in their own ways they have them, and yes, I am. It's interesting. I'm still strongly drawn to the image. I've been doing some Xerox transfers lately that were really fun, and it's. I think that those areas are like they're just areas of fun play for me. Like I enjoy the play of them. And I think that they always influence everything I do. I have no doubt that my need to, like so much of what I do in sculpture comes from trying to find that perfect moment that you look for in photography, that absolute moment. And I think that has informed my sculpture incredibly, because there's that moment of tension that you can see in a photograph, and if you can recapture that in a living moment, it's kind of a backwards way of working. So I think it always informs me. I don't the right now I'll say that like I said, the biggest push that I'm feeling is to move away from the narrative. And it's not for a lack of love for it. It's just for, I want to continue to discover. And I know that fear that I have is the pathway to discovery. So right now, like I'm terrified of working without a narrative, without that thing that I know, and I can play with it. You know, I can take that thing that I know you're going to recognize, that thing that I know you're going to have a reaction to, and I can kind of needle that thing. Without that, it's just me and my feelings. You know, it's just me and what I'm experiencing, and that part's just terrifying me, but in a good way.
You've brought up the term play. How important is play in your process?
You know, it's funny. It's becoming more important now. It's becoming more important in this time when I'm having to really let go of the narrative. The play comes down to it being just for me now, and not making work. I'm really focused on making work that's just for me, and in order to do that and to enjoy it, you have to. For me, I have to let go of any preconceived notions of what someone else might think about it. And the only way that I can get there is if I'm truly playing. And that's been a different process for me, because so often what's happened always in the past is the piece that I'm working on, largely a lot of the work I do it takes a long time. And there are lots of small parts often, or lots of repetitive motion involved. So I have a lot of time to think in the fabrication of my work. In the past, it's always what's triggered. That time is what's triggered the next thing. Like there'll be some idea that will pop in, while I'm working on a project, and the whole time I'm working on one project, I'm thinking about the next one, like just ready to go. And when the pandemic hit, that sort of went away, because I didn't know. It's hard to get excited about a future you can't conceive of, and it's hard to, and so the need to play now has become really important, because as I start to make, and I've started to spend more time in the studio recently, that's the thing that I keep coming back to. The only way it's enjoyable is if I'm enjoying it.
Interesting. I think there is a use of your words, tension between this idea of playing in work and fear in work.
Yeah.
And I'll be interested to see how that kind of comes together. This playfulness, but yet this sense of fear in what you're doing in a positive way.
I hope. I mean, it's my hope is at some point they will connect. That the play will. I believe that the play right now is an opportunity for me to find my language that's just mine, and that's a totally different way of working for me. And so my hope is that once I find the thing that resonates the most to me, then those two things will combine. And the idea part, the part that drives hard to finish something that thinks it has something that can, twist the needle a little bit. I think when I feel certain in the language that I have, that part will reemerge, and I hope that they'll come together, and I'll be able to fully lean into the work. So I use two spaces. I've always worked in a way that allows me to maintain a space. So I always find jobs that have a space involved that I can work in, and that's still true today. So I do a percentage of my work at home and a percentage of my work in the space that I'm in. But let's see here. Let's get a shot of this. Take it out of the vice here. Do you want me to leave you on Hamburg style like this? Is it better for?
Yeah, that would be fine. Yep.
Okay. Well, let me see here. I'm gonna roll up this garage door just for better light. So let's see. I guess I'll flip. Is it possible to flip these around? These cameras? Oh, there it is. There we go. Oh, let's do that. So this is my studio space / garage. It's pretty small. It's a mix of storage and current working space, sort of. This is up top. This is a glass hammock that I built for my last show. That's stored away, and a lot of this kind of stuff over here is all work in progress, or work that I've finished. And then the constant hiding of past work and mess of work to come. I do a little bit of glass work in here. I do some flame working, a little bit of woodworking in here, and then a lot of finishing, just trying to get pieces wrapped up and moved through my treadmill, of course. That's about it. It's a small little space, but it's enough to keep me kind of moving.
I'm discovering with a lot of the artists I've been talking to lately that they do work in very small spaces. Some of them are only like 6 by 6 feet, but they're producing their work there. And, I think that's really helpful for people to see that an artist doesn't necessarily need to have like a 30 by 30 foot studio in order to do something that you.
No, I mean, I actually think that's, that's always been sort of a separate combination of conversations around right now how artists put together their living. You know, I mean, I think that's a very changing conversation right now, and it has been for a long time. But I think that now more than ever, uh, I think that the pandemic has allowed people to look at education a little bit differently, and how they value that. I think it's undeniable that the cost of education is getting to a place where it's inhibiting artists. It's not helping them. And so how we shift those things, I mean, as somebody who's been an outsider who never went to school, I've always, I started out using the boat shop that I had to make work out of. And then I always had a darkroom in my apartment. And I've always moved towards having some type of platform that you can control, and then working outside in the world, and using some combination of the two. Because it's getting harder and harder, and I worry about young people coming up, their ability to sustain. Mm-hmm. Where the concepts of what an artist looks like, or what they've been told artists do historically, and what is currently being offered at market rate, and where those two things combine to make up what's currently happening for an artist today coming up. I think that those two things are bad barometers to mix together for what an artist is about to do. They're historical in a way that things have changed so significantly, even in the last few years, even with this pandemic. And I hope that they continue to, in a way, because I do worry about the accessibility of the system as it stands now.
What kind of advice would you give a fledgling artist, creative, someone that's just kind of on the brink of exploring that as an aspect of their life, or possibly attempting it as a career? Do you have some advice on what you'd recommend they do?
Be involved everywhere. Volunteer at galleries, go to galleries, ask lots of questions of those galleries. They're there for you. Same with museums. Push them to answer your questions. I think beyond that, I think learning a trade, in any trade, be handy. Learn to use some tools. It will save. It doesn't matter if you're going to be a painter. If you're a painter and you can learn how to build your own frames, you've made 30% of the back end of your business. You've taken control of that aspect of your life. I think that the more that you can do to overlap your passion with what you have to do to make a living in this world, and if those two things can plug in together, the more synergy you have between those two places, the better you'll be. And so I think that, it's easy, I think, in the beginning to get to buy all the hype, to believe it has to look a certain way, to believe you have to go to a certain place in order to have a career look a certain way. I don't think that that's true. I think that there's more resources now than ever, and I actually think that, to be honest, I think that the more skills an artist has, the more basic vocational skills an artist has, the more that artist can actually stand out. Because that's the one thing that I see dropping off the most, are people's actual ability to create, their actual skill sets to build. As a society, we've lost them in general. We don't fix our cars anymore. We don't build like we used to build. We don't make like we used to make. And so I think just having those skills means you can always stay busy, you can always be working, and you can always turn that work into the world.
What would you say your role as a creative is in your community? I'm really interested in this aspect of artists and creativity and how they relate to the communities that we live in. And I think that touches a little bit on your notions about how we just don't make anymore. We don't do things. And so I'm curious about how the artist role in our culture has shifted over time, and what does that mean now?
Great question. I think that the community part of that is tricky, because I think it talks about what you consider community. And so when I think about community in terms of the arts, I think about it in terms of the arts community, the people who want to be involved in the arts and the community that forms around them. I don't, I'm cautious to say that I think that I'm not sure how I feel about how art impacts in a living community, how it impacts the people in that community, because it's a biased conversation, and there can be layers to it depending on whose community it is, and what they feel about their community. But I do think that the role of, to me, that the role of art has always been to try and share things. So there is in that desire to share, and that's as much to I think it's as much to say something, like that feeling of wanting to say something while we're here, that desire to make your mark while you're alive. That too is it's about sharing in a way. And I think that how those, how we involve arts and community has a lot to do with the community, but also has a lot to do with how artists perceive themselves as a part of that community. And we haven't historically done, I don't think, a great job always. Artists have at times, like we all know the importance of art in seeing it around in our lives, but how we value it, how we create access for it. Sometimes we as artists don't do a good job at fostering that. We want to also move forward. We want to get our ideas out. We want to make a living. We want to do these things. And I think it can be complicated. It's a really good question. It's a really hard question. I don't know that, I think that art is both so big and so small. It's this thing that you can't imagine your world without it, but it's almost so small in your everyday life that you don't notice all the places it's at. And so I think that the contribution that we make on both sides of that as artists and community feel very similar to that. It's like you'll see a community and how much they're benefiting from the artists, and you think you don't do nearly enough for these artists who are, and as an artist, you're on the other side of that too. And I think it's just always hard to keep in perspective how big and how small it is at the same time. More and more, I am, like I said, I am trying to lean into the idea of art as a meditation, as being something really, some sort of my truest self. And so that no matter what I put out in the world, it's just me doing my very best at being me. And hopefully that relates to somebody else who's just struggling to be their very best version of them, or to understand what their truest version of themselves is. If it relates in that way, that's amazing. I mean, I've always felt like it's incredible when someone walks up to a painting and has an emotion, or you walk up to a sculpture and have an emotion. That painting does not contain that emotion. That painting is just pigment smeared around on a canvas, or that object is just pieces put together. Its ability to convey that emotion, and its ability to connect with somebody else who's feeling that emotion, that is both so big and so small.
You mentioned your practice is becoming very much a meditation in your life. Does that, do you have a ritual around that? Do you have a ritual in your practice that either well-defined or kind of a loose happening?
There has to be a big, one thing that's been a struggle for me in the last year is been trying to maintain a certain level of, I sort of have to clear the decks in order to make art. I have to get to a place where I can put everything down and walk away for a minute. And that has changed throughout my life, my ability to do that. Having a space where I can feel like everything is okay and I can walk away. Now that is very important to me. Like that is the place where I can go and be calm enough to kind of access some of those spaces. When I was younger, before I had my son, and when it was just me, uh, I could kind of dig deeper into those places. I selfishly, I didn't have to worry about if other parts of my life were falling apart. I could just focus on my art. And now it's not like that. Now, in order for my practice to feel good, I need to know that these other parts of my life are there and sustainable. And so that allows me to kind of keep pushing in that same way.
Well, thank you for sharing a little bit about your creativity and your artistry with us today.
Well,
It's
thank you
been a
so
great,
much.
yeah, it's been a really great conversation.
This has been super fun, Jeffrey. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.